Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to the session of the Udacity STEM Forward for Women conference. My name is Christiane Mück. I'm an advisor at MISC Foundation in Saudi Arabia, and I'm excited to moderate this session with our distinguished panel today. We'll be discussing how governments and NGOs can drive change to close the gender STEM talent gap. At MISC Foundation, we've been working closely with Udacity and with others on the STEM capacity building for Saudi men and women for the past few years. And governments and NGOs around the world have done the same. Now, the question is, why are we still having this discussion? I think 2 points are important. One is there's still a gap in STEM, especially when it comes to the participation of women. It will take, I think, around 136 years to close it, and even more so for leadership role. So we need a new generation of female software engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, and so on to fill this gap. The second part is it's just societally and economically a smart thing to close the gender STEM gap. Leads to higher participation, leads to more employment and advancement for women. Now, the motivation for our session today is that this is not just a task for the businesses. It's equally a task for the governments as well as the NGO sector. And one could argue that they are actually better prepared to do this. They can focus more strongly on individual, societal, and economic outcomes, and they can lead disruptive change without focusing on profits every quarter. So for the next 60 minutes, our fantastic panel of experts will offer their expertise on how they have personally cleared the hurdles in their STEM careers and how they are inspiring others to do the same. You will get to know them in a second, but let me quickly introduce our panel. We have with us Dr. Abir Shakweer, who is the Assistant Resident Representative of the United Nations Development Program in Egypt. We have Dr. Huda Al-Husseini, who is the President of the Emirates Digital Association for Women, where she focuses on industrialization and economic development projects. We have Dr. Sonia Ben Jafar, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Abdullah Al-Ghurair Foundation for Education. And last but certainly not least, we have Ukine Bodare, who is the Managing Director of Edo State Skills Development Agency in Nigeria. So a fantastically international and experienced panel. We have a few questions prepared, but I'd like to also encourage the members of the audience to ask their questions. There's a question button at the right-hand side of your window, and we will try to answer at least some of them during the session. So let's jump right in. I already mentioned that there is huge potential for GDP growth by closing the STEM gender gap. What do you see as the biggest ways how governments and NGOs can contribute here and to realize the potential that women have in the STEM sector? Who would like to start? Dr. Sonia?
Sure, thank you. So when half the population feels excluded from a sector that's the future, we have a systemic problem. And right now, we know that automation is becoming the norm, and STEM is at heart as that shift. We know that we have about over 80 million jobs on the way out and 97 million jobs on the way in. So it's slowly evolving into a systemic bias in the system. It's not so much about encouraging women and fueling the drive for more women to enter the STEM field. It's about serious reflection on the way in which women are made to feel excluded and reducing the friction that the entire category of a population feel. So if we're serious about diversity being a part of what we do, and I believe that with diversity comes innovation, this historic and continued imbalance will shortchange us all. So this is not about helping women, this is about helping all of us. And so what does that mean in terms of policies and practices, encouraging young women to see themselves as part of the future that's, let's face it, will be founded on STEM, and I argue is already there. So it means I would like to see us stop banging the drum, pointing the finger at young girls and saying, you should go into this field. We've done that for, I think, 2 decades, 3 decades now. We've had a modicum of success, sure. But when I look at women engineers now, I don't see much change in terms of their work, in terms of their work culture. And I'll take you an example. In preparation for this, I started talking to a lot of my friends who happen to be engineers and female and amazing STEM people. And I'll give one example, and I did get her permission to talk about her story. Her name is Selma Ben Ammar, and I'm sure we all know one of her. She has been with Ericsson since 2006. She's the regional sales director and head of IoT Europe, Latin America, and Mediterranean. What's interesting about her is that she actually graduated high school from Tunisia. She then went to Germany, learned a new language, and then did a master's in telecommunications in Hanover. Later on, got some more experience and did an executive MBA in French. And in recent conversations with her, she was recently in Dubai, she was still the only woman in the room. This is ridiculous. We're 2021. She still talks about the fact that when she enters a room, she has to take a breath, look around, and realize there's nobody else that looks like me. So when I speak up, I have to speak louder. I have to be more aggressive because I have to find a space for me to have room to speak. And she's an incredibly talented young woman who has 2 kids and is raising her family, right? And so I think of the over 1,000 scholarships that the Abdallah Al-Huwair Foundation for Education has given to underserved Arab youth. We have a 50% gender balance within our scholarship program. And I think it's incredible because when I think of her, she didn't need a scholarship. She had a lot of support and family social capital to go in and have that grit to be able to do what she did. But I don't think that we should only have exceptional females in STEM. I think we should be able to be average, just like men. So I don't know that we need to keep encouraging women to pursue STEM education and careers. Education and recruitment may not be our hurt points. I think that retention is our hurt points. And we know that quotas don't work alone. The governments in Scandinavia have been working on that. But I know that you said that NGOs and governments are maybe better suited, but I think perhaps we need to put more pressure on companies, and that's where we will actually make a difference. We need to change how companies cultivate a culture that's female friendly. And we have a lot of examples of success when they do that seriously, rather than just checking a CSR box. So I'll give you an example. I believe in gender blind HR processes. So Airbnb's data team in 2016 decided to go gender blind and was able to up the number of females in their team pretty much automatically, right? And if you don't believe in gender blind HR processes, fine, then make it an advantage to be a woman. Believe that if you are a STEM woman, then you actually have more grit than anyone else in the room because you've had to be the only woman in those engineering courses or in those STEM courses, you know, and we can assure pay equity. So we need to review our HR questions and stop asking for salary history in job interviews. We need family-friendly policies with flex time for commitments that, you know, women have. And I think that those are things that governments can start to incentivize. Yeah. And NGOs can start to give a voice to. And I could go on, but I will say this one. I would like to see people make seat at the table, at the executive table for women, and then actually listen to them. Not just have one in the room so that you don't look like you're biased, but actually listen, because if you want an inclusive workplace culture, you have to take it seriously, and male-dominated workplaces are simply harder for independent women to sit as a sole entity and have that welcoming environment.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sonia. Please, yeah. Huda, go ahead.
I mean, amazing, Sonia. Thank you so much for the insight, and Christian for the question. And we have to be very, very aware in 2021 of the systematic biases that exist in the system. But our number one concern is the value pipeline that we should put out there. It's not just about the recruitment process or the retention process. It's about the whole value chain and having a huge level of inclusivity across this value chain. I am Selma. I'm another Selma as well. I graduated from an IT and engineering program in UAE University. I was in the 70% of the class percentage. I did my master's in France in mathematics and cryptology. I was among the 12% of the class. I did my PhD in Denmark in cryptography, cryptanalysis, another very niche field in mathematics and computer science and electrical engineering. I was among the 1% of the team. And to me, it was a very strange, mesmerizing fact that in the Middle East, I was a majority, and in the Western world, the coin was flipped, and I was a minority. And it showed me I was a very exciting young engineer trying to seek an international experience and be immersed in research and development activities across board with this kind of analysis that the global experience is better than the local experience that is offered in the Middle East. The flipping point here is I worked with the government sector, I worked with the private sector, I worked in American companies and in the local companies. And the level of, I would say, sometimes discrimination or systematic biases that exists against a gender or against, not a gender, sometimes a behavior, sometimes ethnicity or a group of people. Unfortunately, in my very limited 18, 17 years of experience, it comes from the box where it should not actually happen. It comes from these companies and environments that are international in their bodies, and that, for example, could be American or European. And I spent like sleepless hours trying to understand what is the missing silver bullet here. What is the solution? Is the solution really focusing on STEM education and telling women across field? Because for Emirates Digital Association for Women, we're trying to provide insights for women. Is the solution actually advocating for women in STEM? No. The solution is actually having this kind of wide bridge analysis and trying to understand the systematic gaps that exist in the system. And that tells you, and if you didn't read a book called The Invisible Woman, please go back and read that book, because it tells you that, for example, the system is built to be systematically biased, to see that 50% more likely of women who would be diagnosed of heart attacks will be misdiagnosed by heart attacks, because the system was built to diagnose men better than women. The designers were generalizing the way they diagnose certain people, certain patients, or the way that they look at the data. So what we are trying to do in Emirates Digital Association for Women, Women AI, we're trying to build community programs. We will encourage the community to have their work in STEAM areas, and STEAM because the A is for arts, and we believe heavily in creative industry, and we don't believe in cutting and choosing and pushing women into specific directions where they might be a minority in the future. We never know what is the future trends of the world. We're trying to equip our talent with the best practices that would enable them to lead the future, reduce the gender gap, not to have this kind of a global washing, I would say, mechanism of saying that you do have to be, talent in STEM. And don't get me wrong, I was born and raised and bred to be a STEM talent. But I went back, I took my MBA, I went back, I studied law, and I will keep on diversifying my talent, because I believe that a talent is an ownership of a person, and you should have a 360 approach of how you build it, because you never know how the future will jump into a new trend, and you should be able to steer your talent to the needs of the economy, to the needs of creating an economy. Why women are better on the diversity and inclusion on the table, decision-making table? It's because of their agility and jumping into switching and transitioning from one field of expertise to the next. So let's use that to their advantage. Let's make sure that there are seats in the senior level of the table for women, because seniors needs to be there to champion juniors and to champion an ecosystem shift. We need to make sure that there are ecosystem wealth of opportunities to juniors, middle management, senior management, or mid-track and senior track women, wherever they are across their cycle. We need to make sure that there are scholarships for women, for STEM, for financial education, for creative industry. If a woman decided to do a PhD in creative industries and in something around the world, then she should be able to do that, because we shouldn't wait until the World Economic Forum produce a report saying that creative industry is an important sector for us to catch up. We should have the foresight of equipping women for what is the best for them. So that's the merit of the conversation here. Let's not eliminate options. Let's improve potential of employability, improve potentials of education that exist for women across boards here. And this is part of the SDG kind of campus and SDG global goals. We know that we're talking about the right of inclusivity as one aspect, and also about the fact that innovation and industrialization is another aspect, and global as well, collaboration as a third aspect within the ecosystem of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So can you imagine the power if you enabled a community of women or a community that is aspiring for inclusive and reduced gaps and inclusive opportunities, reduced gaps to work on innovation projects, regardless of these industries were in STEM or not STEM or STEAM in general, and leverage the global collaboration to build an ecosystem for them. This is what we need to focus on, in my opinion, having that kind of value add pipeline and building the ecosystem around it. It's not easy. We need to look beyond the statistics, beyond the data that are served to us on a silver platter on a daily basis.
Thank you, Huda. This is a very inspiring statement. And, listening to both of you, on the one hand, I'm a bit happy because we're not anymore talking about the very front of the funnel. We don't have to explain anymore why it's good to inspire young girls, young women to study STEM subjects, to go into STEM careers. But now we've just shifted the problem to a little bit later in the careers. Sonia, you mentioned retention. Huda, you mentioned biases in the workplace and society. So those go a little bit deeper than just looking at share in certain subjects, retention rates in the job market, and so on. I see you nodding energetically. You can.
Yes, yes, I totally agree with everything that's been said. And one thing I just want to emphasize, everybody creates. When designing and when creating systems and worlds, we all create a world where we feel comfortable in. And sometimes even unconsciously, by creating a world that we feel comfortable in, we exclude certain other people. And that's, I believe, what is happening at this point. Because the world of work that we all as women had to come into was designed during the first industrial revolution by men for men who could leave in the morning and come back late at night and didn't have to bother because there was a woman taking care of the children. And then so many years later, decades later, we are still trying to survive in that world of work that was really created by people who didn't know what we would have to deal with. So if now that the world is going in a different direction with STEAM and with the future of work, with technology and everything, that all the opportunities that it unveils, it is very important for me, I think. Yes, we've spoken about getting more young girls and how that might not necessarily be the whole solution, but we need more women in decision-making positions. We need more women in design-making positions so that when this world of, as it is happening right now, while this new world of work is being designed, we are also creating a world where we belong. And that doesn't just refer to male and female, it also refers to women of color, it refers to every individual. How do we make sure that diversity is at the highest level of designing this future and today that we are all already trying to survive in? And that's where government can come in, because you're saying where do governments and NGOs come in? I think in making those policies that encourage companies, just like Dr. Sonia said. So companies, we have to put pressure on the companies to have enough women on the board, have enough women in the executive seats making decisions. We need to have more women at all stages and at all levels, even right from young people all the way to, we need to have young people as well, and then people of all ages. And government can make policies, government can make appointments, government can induce fines if it has to get to that point. But we cannot just so as somebody who works in government, for me, that's the perspective I'm looking at more, where government can use its leverage and use its power to ensure that women are not just getting more opportunities, like more skills and more opportunities to get into STEM, but women are more involved in decision making when it comes to the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Okenebo. This is great, and I'm really curious because so you mentioned decision making and design making, and you're based out of Nigeria, I guess, but with a very international outlook. Do you have any interesting examples that might be relevant for us?
Oh, sure. Okay, from the design perspective, I talked about people creating worlds that they feel comfortable in. I remember a couple of years ago, very early on, when the conversation about getting more girls involved in STEM and all that, and we had this program for engineering, and we decided that we were going to have 60% female and 40% male to take part in this scholarship program. And the whole team was ready to go. We did everything from making sure that on the advertising, we had only females on the advertising. We got females to go out and distribute information. By the end of the day, less than 10% of the people who applied were women. Right. So, and it was a big learning thing for us. Like I said, this happened many years ago. And then by the time we sat down and discussed with the people so we wanted 60% female, but they didn't even apply. So there was no way we were going to get 60% female. So by the time we went back into the design of the program, discussing with people who were trying to attract, we found out that the timing didn't work for them. They had to think of where to put their kids, or let's have a crash so that they can have their kids there. So, if the person you're trying to engage is not part of the design, then no matter how much they want to be in it, they're not going to end up there. So we started the process of co-creating, for every single thing we want to do. And then when it comes to these decisions about budgets, about how much are we going to spend on this? Oh, like you said, if a woman walks into a room and she's the only woman, typically she feels like, oh, I have to speak a little bit louder. So then she wants more women in the room, usually. And if she has the power to bring in more women into the room, she will. So that's why I'm saying the power to make decisions, and then also having more women in design. So when women have the power, then you have more women in the room, not to exclude men, but just to ensure that the whole world we've created, everybody fits in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that speaks to the system change that you were talking about, Hoda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm so happy that Okenebo, you shared this. You shared the experience of systematic change is a chosen change. You need to choose to have a systematic change and to make sure that you have the strategic outline of the whole value chain that you need to create, the ecosystem of impact. So you could say that in this phase, I would engage government, I would engage corporate, I would engage the public sector, I would engage the NGOs, and what are the level of influence and engagement that you're seeking. It all depends on the level of impact or indicators of impact that you're looking for. We've seen it firsthand here in UAE. Okenebo, I would like to share the fact that in UAE, we have a law, a regulation that says it's illegal actually to discriminate wages between men and women. It's out of a question. You're taking it off the table from just corporates or businesses or government sector entities to make their individual choices about it. There is a law and regulation against it. So when it comes to also providing the proper ideal environment for both genders to perform optimally in working environments, then we need as well equivalent policies and regulations that says, For example, maternity leave need to be designed in a specific way because men and women are designed differently within this parenthood journey. They have different responsibilities, and family should be part of the decision when creating and co-designing working environment. I remember when I spent time in Scandinavia, and to the point that Sonia made, that they have specific rules when it comes to gender inclusivity, and I would agree to this. I mean, they did have regulations against gender imbalances, against who should be in leadership on rotational basis from both genders. So this was assigned to specific time windows and regulated heavily. The maternity leave used to be, or paternity leave used to be equally extended to both parents, in the sense that they wanted to support the child for the first 4 years, saying that the first 4 years of a child are the most important years of development. So they wanted them to have both their parents' experience in. So they used to give the woman a year of maternity leave, and the parent and the man as well a year of paternity leave. And that would just, leverage a better decision making for women and men when they want to tackle, but specifically women, getting into a STEM field and getting into that kind of level of engagement. Yeah.
Yes. And I think this is maybe a great point in time to loop in Abir, who looks at this from the perspective of international agencies, so even one level up from the government. Yet, I guess, with heavy experience and great examples from on-the-ground work in specific countries.
Thank you, Christiane, and I really agree with everything that has been said. And I would like to really highlight that this is not for one stakeholder to handle. It's not only the government, it's not the NGOs, it's the whole society. And each stakeholder has its own tools to push for STEM education. And this has actually to start at the level of schools, if not kindergarten. So let me tell you briefly examples of how we at UNDP push for gender equality and gender in STEM education, and then we'll go through how I see government and NGOs can work together to push for STEM education or equality in STEM education. We actually very much advocating for gender equality across everything, not only STEM education. But what we have developed is something called gender seal. And this is how you award institutions that have gender equality at the institution. This goes for any institution that can apply for this gender seal, and it is recognized from the UN system, so it's something prestigious. And we actually managed to have one of the institutions in Egypt that works on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, the development of the MSME sector, to be the first gender seal entity in the Arab region. We were very proud to see more women working at the institution. Another thing that we are working on is that now, that we are working with the government, we are working with NGOs, and we are working with private sector, but we are mainly supporting the government to implement its strategies. And what we have is something called ranking of the projects, gender marker. If this project mainly targeting gender equality, it takes a certain rank. If it's not, or the gender equality is not one of the main objectives, it takes a different rank. But at the end of the day, we evaluate the projects as a portfolio. One of the criteria is how many projects do we have that has the gender marker as number 1 or number 2 or number 3. So this is another mechanism that we push for gender equality across the board and across different projects. But actually, I want to go back to the role of government and NGOs. I think that usually, of course, government look at the national strategies, and they look at how to make a national change. And this issue of gender equality in STEM education has to be a systematic change. So they need to put strategies, for example, in education that's girls-friendly strategies, whether it's the school ecosystem, whether it's how teachers look at girls, because usually teachers expect more from boys when it comes to science, math, and physics, more than they expect from girls. And this is indirectly change the mindset of girls and discourage them from pursuing STEM education related disciplines. Also, how to connect science, technology, and math to society, because research like showed that girls and women, they always would like to pursue careers that have an impact on the society. And science and technology and math and physics, they have a great impact on the society, but this link is not clear through the education process. So instead of telling girls make or develop a robot that moves 5 steps, you can tell them develop a robot that brings medicine to an older person. So, so this kind of girls friendly strategy. Other things, as colleagues here mentioned, like the composition of the boards of scientific research and universities. We need to make sure that women are well represented in those boards, because if you talk of gender equality, you will find out that many places have gender equality in terms of numbers, but it's not in terms of quality. So in the top management, women are very, very poorly represented. And I can really connect it to what my colleagues here, Hoda and Sonia, mentioned. I spent 3 years literally in each and every meeting being the only woman on the table, working as in a science and technology development agency, having a very high position there, but I still was the only woman on the table. On the other hand, NGOs have a very important role to play in advocacy, and never underestimate the role of advocacy and how they can make or they can influence the decision-making process and policy making. This is very important. And also awareness raising of the parents, because I really can't understand the question of what my daughter should study as a field that's more suitable for girls. What is this question? This is again, it's not only the role of the government, it's the role of the parents as well. So I think it's really kind of a whole society approach. We need to go for a whole society approach. Thank you.
Huda, I saw you nodding quite vigorously at points of this.
Yeah,
Where do you see your organization playing in this? There were a number of demands, let's say, raised to the NGO sector and to leaders in the sector. How would you respond to this?
I think what's really interesting here is in 2021, we share the same perspective. We really need to have a holistic approach, and it's a collaborative approach. It's not one entity leading the effort and other is taking a backseat. It's a collaborative approach where everybody has a stake into this mission, into this purpose, actually working better. Because how can you design? I think that's what I liked, and I will borrow it. Yukonepo said, how can we design solutions for the world? And the world is not part of the solution design making process. And it's not only women here. Because we're women, we care about community. Thank you, Abir, for highlighting this. And this is what I sensed as well. When I work with women on building industries for development, they care about the purpose, the greater good, the impact that they could create in the world. And this is why we have a direct link to the SDG impact of the different projects that women could build. Not only women, I'm sure anybody who have been a minority at a point of time or perceived a minority at a point of time, they would share the same kind of aspiration of trying to make a difference. We, of course, need to do the research and pull in the data behind it. So number one element here to realize, it's a holistic process. It's a joint effort. It's a collaborative effort where no one should be marginalized in what they could bring into the table. I always say it's an impact of abundance. The more you have on the table, the better it is. No competition should be applied onto this aspect. This is why we do encourage a boot camp that comes from the government side, or a boot camp that comes from the NGOs, or a boot camp that comes from the industry sector. And we try, let's collaborate and bring in the better perspective of developing a technology or developing an industry into the table with our women community. And the second aspect that I would like to highlight, I think we need to be very aware of the barriers. There are barriers that exist. The barriers are different from one community to another, from one society to another, from one geographical location to another. So we cannot design solutions of one size fit all kind of an aspect. We need to understand exactly what is happening and what are our barriers. We can't just say we have gender kind of gap that fits what's happening in the United States or what's happening in Europe and bringing that kind of learning lesson into the Middle East, or taking the Middle East experience and globalize the solution making process unless it has been really well analyzed and well designed and well thought of and all of these kind of other aspects. So yes, so this kind of customized design making process into understanding why certain barriers existed. I think when we have discussed this panel, there has been an article that has been pushed for us to analyze and to say that STEM gaps exist a majority in the US more than where their existence in the Middle East, or their existence in certain countries like Qatar, like Saudi, like UAE. And this is something that we have been baffling about. I had this conversation as well with my Australian friends where they said, why do you have 70% of women in STEM in UAE and we don't have 20% in Australia? It doesn't make sense. We do have investment programs to push women for STEM education. We do have all of these kind of other funding projects that goes for it. And what I explained to him is like, we don't actually put barriers to boys or girls, men or women, male and female, when we're trying to encourage them to choose a career. It is the indigenous statistic of the community, because the community feel empowered to make their own decision. The community here think that a STEM education is a ticket to a better job. So that's the metric of analysis. Is it going to get me a better economic value? Yes, I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to go behind it. If it's not perceived as an option that would give you a better economic value or a better contribution wave, then you don't go for it. And this is maybe what the article as well shed light on. And they say that in the US and the United States and Europe, the perceived job impact is not maybe for STEM. People think that they could make a better salary being in other sectors than being in STEM sectors. And maybe this is why they would deviate in that. Maybe the barriers of the sectors are lower. So it means I'm going to get an average salary with less barrier, with an easier career pathway transitions than just being in STEM. So we need to fix that career transition and within a STEM field. So I mean, the intricate details do really matter here. But the number one call, a global call that I would make here is to make a seat at the table. Always make sure that it's illegal, it's abnormal to just have one person of a certain group being represented on the table. Being a woman or being a minority or being whatever it is, it shouldn't be one person representing. It should be a good certain percentage of viewers representing the community within the design solution, the strategic design solution process, or within the leadership process of the company. I mean, look at the unicorns. The unicorns are being created by dropouts of university, but not by STEM graduates who are interested in STEM impact, by the way, into a humanitarian greater good purposes. And sometimes the people who are created it or the task force that they're working with, they're the millennials, the young generation, the youth. So, I mean, try to get the perspective of the child, the perspective of the teenager, the perspective of the senior person, the perspective of a woman, and everybody else who are not the common public, who are not the common person within the statistics that is.
I think she just went on mute.
Now we got you back. Thank you,
Yeah.
Huda.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Could I add something to what Huda said, which I think is important, is contextual realities and national differences are incredibly important. And so if, you were talking about the STEM field and why perhaps in the Arab world, people gravitate towards it versus in the US. Well, the US Census Bureau, and this is 2021, this was reported in 2021. The US Census Bureau had some research on ranges of women and men getting paid in various STEM fields. Interestingly, they studied 70 STEM occupations and found that women earned more than men in only one field, computer network architects. Now, if I know that I'm going to work harder and I'm not going to get paid as much, that's not going to work for me at all. So that doesn't work. The US is not an example to be followed in this respect. And I personally don't think that we should be following them. They're behind in STEM education. They're behind in so many pieces, except for in that same study that we looked at, perhaps the PhDs that they graduate from tertiary institutions. What's interesting about that study that you referred to is when we looked at the UNESCO data, it was telling us that many students are awarded STEM degrees in a given country, but not if they're citizens of that country. So again, going to the US, they did a case study and they looked at a 5-year period, 2011 to 2015. 86% of the PhDs awarded to non-citizens were in science and engineering. So the STEM degrees represented most of the degrees earned by students from outside the United States. Interestingly, students from China, India, and South Korea accounted for more than half of those awarded to temporary visa holders. The gender of the degree recipients with temporary visas, not reported. So it's not important for them, which I find interesting in and of itself. So what was studied in that study and what was not studied in that study in and of itself, to me, signifies a bias. But when I look at why people make those decisions and looking at contextual realities, where STEM degrees are offered, where people will gravitate towards, if they are doing international travel to get their degrees because it's not being offered in their host country or their home country, all of that is not embedded, all of that is not taken into account into this very simple statistical study that was done, which is a fun statistical way of looking at things. But what I think is more important than that is looking at the context of where women are made to feel included and why or why not they're not made to feel included. My grave concern is that we're talking about STEM like it's this entity over here, and then there's the rest of the workplace. And that's a problem because STEM is not independent of every single piece of the fourth industrial revolution. So not including women in STEM means you don't include them in the workforce anymore, except for low-level skilled workforce, right? If we're going to talk about an executive, they need to be able to use a dashboard. If you're going to talk about a project manager, they need to be able to use that software. And that is all kind of like the basic digital literacy that starts to be able to advance STEM education. So we're not talking about this field that was like futuristic the way it was when we were talking about it in the 80s. We're talking about something that is ubiquitous. I mean, we're now in an era of metaverse. That's what we're talking about now. We're not even talking about the internet anymore. So I don't think that it's really about, what should we be doing for women, but what should we be doing for inclusion, which I resonate with what you were saying. And I'm pointing like everybody can see who I'm pointing to, Huda. But the point is that if we are going to move forward, the role of NGOs to me is to be able to maybe pilot and articulate and be the voice for those who don't have a voice because they are super marginalized. And we've seen with the COVID pandemic, this becoming unfortunately amplified. So we have a number of projects, but one of them is, well, one of the initiatives is His Excellency's Abdelaziz's Refugee Education Fund. And during the COVID pandemic, a lot of the face-to-face pieces were just terminated. And we worked with War Child Holland, UNICEF, all of our partners on the ground, in particular in Lebanon, I'm thinking of it. And we had to go in, and in Jordan, we had to go in and we had to do some cultural awareness pieces to allow the families to let the girls get on the tablet, get on the phone that we provided so that they could actually learn. And we're not even talking about learning STEM. We're just talking about learning in terms of basic literacy and numeracy so that they could continue their education in school when it came back. So I think that there's a lot of cultural pieces here, and the narrative that it's all the same and it's just women in STEM and STEM is over here is a little bit outdated. And I'd like to see it immersed into this fourth industrial revolution and really talk about the role of women everywhere, and that STEM is everywhere, and that we need to not exclude half the population, be they women of color, be they people of determination, be they women who are considered advantaged. It doesn't matter. You know, I think that we really do need that diversity. And I couldn't agree with you more with regards to the executive level representation to be able to speak this truth and then do something about it in a systemic way.
Thank you, Sonia. And this is you alluded to the COVID situation, which, you know, depending which country we're in, we're already out of, or we're just moving back into, or we're still suffering from in one way or another. And obviously, the point has been made many times. A lot of the burden of care, the burden of staying at home. Working and doing 3 jobs at the same time has been falling to women over the last 2 years. Now, some people see this as the going back 20 years and you know, regressing. Others see this as the opportunity of a generation. Which is it? What are your experiences? Where are the glimpses of hope?
Can I go on this question? Okay, so I think there is a challenge and opportunity that exists. It depends on how would we take this forward. The challenge that exists here is we need to learn and use our learning lesson. Our learning lesson here, it's not going to be the same methods and the same solutions that we built in the past that will solve our future issues. If we are trying to build an inclusive environment, it needs to be inclusive for all genders, all minorities, ethnic groups, all people, all world representations that are supposed to be on the table, including women. And that's very important because, as Sonia said, in 2021 and going into 2022 and the future, the well-being of an individual within an environment is important. I'm not interested to go into a working environment that I would be marginalized on and I have to push it through barriers X, Y, Z to get where I want to go, regardless of what I am in this community. So we need to remove barriers. We need to build working environments that accelerates in removing barriers from people rather than build this kind of systematic bureaucratic boxes of individuals to coexist in a specific environment. Performance and productivity should be analyzed in a different metric than, for example, being in an office in a specific geographical location from specific timelines. And that's very important, I think. To put into
that's
the
a characteristic of the fourth industrial revolution that I think Okinebo, you were mentioning before that you know we shouldn't be measured this way anymore. We shouldn't maybe work like this anymore. And
Exactly.
now we have the opportunity to just start
Do
new.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to seize the opportunity now that it exists, now that there's so many. I mean, COVID forced everyone to think about a new way of working, new ways of access, of being assessed, new ways of being in touch with clients. And I mean, like what we're doing here today, things that would typically make women disadvantaged all of a sudden are not essential to the workplace anymore. And then how do we manage those things? Knowing still that even working from home doesn't necessarily make it easier for a woman, because now you're available 24 hours a day to the office, available 24 hours a day at home. But then, it's changing. The everything is changing, and this is the time for, women like everybody on this call to really start making decisions and creating a new world that works for everyone. Yeah.
Well, Christiane, if I want to comment on this, I think that the crisis was an eye-opener. And it pinpointed many challenges, including the load on the women, the unpaid work that they are doing at home. And this escalated a lot or intensified during COVID. So yes, it's a sad situation, but at the end of the day, we have to make use of the opportunity that exists with the situation. We are all hearing the notion of building back better. How are we going to build back better if we are excluding women, if we are excluding persons with disabilities, if we are excluding all the minority groups that we are not taking into consideration, while that has been said by Kinobo, is that co-creation and co-design. So we need to include everyone. I'm quite sure that everyone knows that, for example, women with disabilities are subject to triple discrimination, being disabled, being poor, and being women. So it's like we need to change the way we are handling things. We need to innovate, because the future is about innovation. Now it goes without saying. So we need, for innovation, we need that diversity as well. So we need to include everyone and make sure that everyone is heard and every skill is included, every new idea is catered for.
Any good examples from your work environment on how to do that, especially during COVID?
Well, actually, we have a very flexible working mechanism. Since the breakout of the pandemic, we are not back to office yet. So we have been working of course, we are now can go to office as we wish, but we are not obliged to go to office. We actually have a very well representation of women in the office. I think we are more women than men in the office. Colleagues can come to meetings, online meetings, having their kids playing around. We can hear the kids are attending the meetings with us. So it's like it's not a rigid environment. It's very flexible. And this allows all of us, especially women, to bear the extra burden that has been put on their shoulders because of COVID, but in a better, more relaxed way. So flexible working environment is very important. Not only, actually, it's for everyone, but especially for women.
Yeah,
And that
fantastic. Go ahead.
That goes towards the female friendly workplace and workspace, the hyperflex. I used to, before this job, I founded my own company and ran a boutique consultancy, and I used to get incredible talent that nobody else would hire, and then they would try and poach them, but they couldn't because I had incredible loyalty. It's not because I paid them more, I paid them a decent wage, but it's because I gave them flexibility and understanding, right? And that was something that they simply couldn't take in a different work environment. This was way Zoom was just a normal thing, but it's because I had clients all over the world, it didn't make sense for me to make somebody go to an office in Dubai, right? It made sense for them to be at the client site. It made sense for them to be on Teams. It made sense for them not to spend an hour on the road back and forth when they really just wanted to pick up their kids, go home. I often have women saying, listen, it's that after school hour, before the activity and when I need to pick them up. There's this 1 hour that's just killing me. And because of that, I can't have a job. And I said, what if I said that could be your time off? And then you would make up that hour later on. And they kind of looked at me and like, this has never been heard of before, right? And I find it interesting that during the COVID pandemic, people were like, oh my God, there's so much going on at home and people have to deal. Well, women have been dealing with this all the time. This is not new. The only difference is it became visible. And I think women have been keeping it invisible because there is very little tolerance for it. So this idea, and I love what you talked about, Dr. Rabia, that somebody would just have a child pop in and pop out, and we have that very, very famous BBC special when the kids came in and everything. I didn't think that was like very incredible. Like it was unfortunate that it happened on like international TV, but in fact, that's just kind of what women have to deal with all the time. And I think that there's been this shift in being more understanding because men have suddenly had to deal with it. That's all. That's what's shifted. And if we had more executives at the table who were willing to stand up and say, actually, no, I get more loyalty, I get more productivity from somebody who I let off for 2 hours during the middle of the day because she makes up that time in droves at the end of the day, then we would have had that talent growing. And so this motherhood tax that people are paying needs to go. It's just a ridiculous, ancient, archaic, fundamentally wrong way of doing business. And we see this, and with the advent of this fourth industrial revolution, what they're calling for is flexibility for diversity of work, of talent needs. Some people work better independently, some people work better in groups, some people work better in the morning, some people work better in the afternoons. And to say we all need to work from 9 to 5 is to say we all need to be on the factory line. And that's not the case anymore. So, this idea is that we're evolving, I think, is nice, but it's old and it's just coming too slow for me. And the fact that we're tying it to just women bothers me, because I think that this is more than just about women. This is about diversity and inclusion and being sensitive to the fact that everyone has something to offer. And I've said this many times. I work with youth all the time. I said, there's almost 8 billion people on the planet. There's only one of you. What is it that you can offer that no one else can offer? And how can I cultivate an environment where you can bring that out and make that contribution? And if everybody thought that way, as opposed to a quarterly return on investment at all costs, in terms of the sustainability mindset, then perhaps this conversation would be about how to fine tune that rather than how do we push this mammoth down the road that we've been pushing for decades as women.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. And honestly, the talent, the fantastic talent that no one would hire, I think says it all. This has to become a disadvantage in the market rather than an afterthought. So thank you so much for your contributions. We're nearly at the end of the discussion. I have one last question for each of you with maybe one sentence answer. So from the perspective of your workspace of your organization, what's the one silver bullet that will significantly advance us for gender equity in STEM? Whoever wants to go first.
I would go first. There are short-term and long-term. I'll go with the short-term one and the long-term one. So for me, short-term, there should be a mandate of a championship or for championing women on the executive level, on the leadership level. And they should as well be not passive actors, but active actors for reducing the gender gap. Because this passive as well role kills the purpose and the mission sometimes. And in long term, a holistic analysis of what is missing in any ecosystem and solving that. Because our global goal is the SDG impact, I would say. It's not the fourth industrial revolution. It's short-term kind of quest that will evaporate, and then we'll have another revolution that will run behind. So we need to make the world a better place with whatever we have, and less than 130 years to live.
You want to go next to Kinebo?
Okay, yes. Okay. I would say for me, is it a silver bullet is for us to, for the world, anyway, we're dreaming now, right? For the world, for executives, for everyone who's making decisions to understand that there is a female perspective and that everything is better when that female perspective is part of it. When we just have a half of the world's brain and mind and style of thinking, making decisions, we can never get the best. So if we know we have that female perspective, women don't have to try to be like men when discussing, when making suggestions, or you don't want people to say, oh, it's because she's a woman. We don't mind. Yes, it's because I'm a woman and you need my perspective. And then the men who are sitting at the table and making a decision would know that, look, there's no woman here, so definitely we are going to make a decision that is not going to be good enough. So every way that anybody, whether it's government, whether it's individuals, NGOs, like Dr. Abir said, it's the society can drive that understanding that the female perspective is needed, will naturally flow into STEM and STEAM and the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah.
Thank you. Abir, would you like to go next?
Yeah, actually, we talked about governments, NGOs, and whole society, but we didn't talk about girls. I want girls to know their worth. I want girls to invest in themselves, in their skills. They read, they take internships. If you are the only girl in the room, do it. Still do it. I think this is also one thing that we need to keep being persistent on, and this will lead to a change. It will contribute to the change. So I want girls to know their worth.
Thank you.
Yeah. Like I said, that's me. That's my cue. I would agree with and resonate what everybody said, and I would also add, in terms of a silver bullet, let's stop looking at our gender as an entire single homogeneous thing, right? We're very diverse even amongst ourselves, and if we can stop just talking about women and we can just talk about humans, I think then suddenly it just becomes about individuals and individual contributions and individual adaptation, and how we can assure that we're cultivating a sustainable future for every individual on this planet, so that they can grow from wherever they are, be they a refugee who's sitting in a camp, which we deal with, or somebody who's been given a little bit more of a privileged life in terms of their pathway, and making sure that the caring is there for everybody to understand that everybody is struggling and everybody's trying to do something, and let that growth happen. And I think that when that conversation is what we're talking about, then we'll all evolve into kind of, to me, that's the silver bullet when we talk about individuals.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your inspiring contributions, for the discussions, for the examples, and thank you for being with us today. And also everyone who's listening, thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, thanks.